If there's one thing that's going to make or break your mix, it's this. Hey everybody, I'm Johnny from Worship Sound Guy, and today we're taking a deep dive into gain structure. Now, I know, you're probably like, Johnny, come on, gain structure is like audio 101. And you're exactly right. It's the foundation of your entire mix, and you're probably doing it wrong. Let's get started. Gain structure is the most important aspect of your mix to get right. It doesn't matter how good you are at EQ, compression, or balancing levels. If your gain structure isn't set correctly, your mix is never going to be as good as it could be. This is important no matter what kind of mixing console you're working with, analog, digital, it doesn't matter. In fact, it's especially important on digital consoles because they tend to be much less forgiving than analog consoles if you make a mistake with your gain structure. We're going to be focusing on input gain because that's going to set up the rest of our gain structure throughout the console and into our amps and speakers. I'm going to teach you one particular method of setting gain. I know there are lots of different approaches out there, but I'm going to explain why, especially on a digital console, there really is only one correct way to do it. Now, let's back up and take a 30,000-foot view of the unique challenge that we have as live sound engineers. When we're setting gain structure for live sound, we're actually setting gain for two different scenarios or workflows. First is for the input of our console. The input side of gain structure would be similar to someone in like a recording studio setting up an audio console to record a band. They're setting gain levels for an optimal input level to get a great recording. Now, in that situation, they're not worried about making a great sounding final mix. The fader levels could be all over the place, and it really doesn't matter because all that the recording engineer is concerned with is recording a great input signal going into their recording software. Then comes the second scenario or workflow, mixing. This is all about what comes out of the console. In the studio production world, mixing is an entirely separate process from recording. Because of that, the mixing engineer doesn't have to worry about anything besides how the final mix sounds. They usually don't even have to consider input levels at all. Those were already set when the band was recorded. They don't have to worry about things like gain level to the band's monitoring system or level to a live stream or how the input levels and the output levels are working together. They're only concerned with how the final mix sounds. In live sound, we get to worry about both of those things, the inputs and the final mix. We're in charge of getting an input signal with proper gain structure and an output mix that sounds great. We're doing the job of the recording engineer and the mixing engineer all at once. That means our gain structure has to be perfect. Now, tell me if this sounds familiar. You want your gain structure to be correct, so you set it the way you think you should. But then, as soon as you start to pull a fader up to 0, it's way too loud in the room. Maybe it's something like a kick drum or a snare drum. I see this all the time with those inputs, but this can happen with any channel. So you've got your gain set right, but it doesn't sound right in the room in terms of volume. So what do? A lot of people will reach for either the fader or the gain knob to turn the volume down in the room and get it to a manageable level. But let's talk about why both those responses are actually incorrect. Let's focus on the faders first, because that's the route that most people will choose. Have you ever looked at the little numbers next to the fader on your console? You probably should. They represent the difference in volume that you get as you move the fader up and down. So check this out. As you move the fader from here to here, you get a 6 dB difference in volume. You can tell that because of the little numbers on the side. But what if our fader starts down here and we move it the same distance? Check that out. The same distance on the fader is getting like 20 dB of volume difference. That's because fader volume isn't linear. It's logarithmic. That's a really fancy math term that we're not going to get into right now, but here's what you need to know. If you have the fader up around the 0 dB mark, the fader movements can be much more precise. You can move the fader a small amount and get a precise increase or decrease in volume. You can accurately adjust things by a decibel or two because the fader resolution is highest near the 0 dB mark. If we try to make those kind of precise adjustments with our fader down low, it's going to be much harder to do because the volume level is going to change much more rapidly when our faders are down so low. So we want to mix with our faders near that 0 mark, which is called unity. It doesn't have to be right on it, but we want it to be close. The whole idea here is that we want to be able to mix in high resolution. We don't want our faders down in that range where small movements are producing really big volume changes. We want to be able to mix with precision, and that happens when our faders are living around that unity 0 area. On modern sound systems, you can easily hear a decibel or two of volume change, so we need to be able to operate with that level of precision. And we can't do that if our fader is living at a low level where small movements are producing big changes. So our ultimate goal is to get our console set up where we can mix with all of our faders in that high resolution area. Okay, so what do? Do we turn down our gain so we can turn up the fader? Not quite. Let's look at what that gain knob is actually doing. First, have you ever asked yourself, what is gain? To put it simply, gain is controlling the level of our preamplifier circuit. It's taking that very low-level electrical signal from a microphone and it's amplifying it into something that our console can work with. Have you ever asked yourself why you even need the signal to be preamplified? Maybe you've never actually thought about this before, but it's time to ask that question. What is our preamp actually doing? So there's only one reason we even need a preamp: to turn a mic level signal into a line level signal. That's it. Microphones and other devices operate at one electrical level, and audio consoles operate at another. The mic preamp, and specifically the gain circuit, take the mic level signal and amplify it into a line level signal that our console is optimized to work with. Now, here's where it all starts to come together. When we set our gain, our objective is to get the signal to line level. Well, okay, how do we know what line level even is? The answer is actually really simple. We look at our console meter. Now, that makes it sound really easy, right? Like, just look at the meter. But if it were that easy, I wouldn't be making this video. So why is it so tricky to get gain set properly? Why are there so many different approaches on how to set levels? The reason I think most people are so confused on this is because the meter system isn't clear. Different manufacturers will calibrate things slightly differently, and depending on the console, you might have a bunch of different choices on how to meter your incoming audio signal. On this Digicode 225 behind me, if I go into my metering options, I can choose between SD default, CBC, ABC, UK, EBU, Nordic, and something ambiguously called just digital. Additionally, in that option menu, I can set the operating level of the console anywhere from 15 to 24 dBu. Confused yet? Yeah, so is everyone. Here's my rule of thumb: leave it in default mode. If you need to use any of those other metering or operating levels, you'll know it. You'll likely be in a very particular broadcast situation or something where you're required to have a different meter calibration. But for our purposes, let's just leave it in the default mode and don't ever worry about it again. Now, let's talk about how to actually set up your input gain. As we look on the meter, I don't actually care too much about the numbers on the meter. Like we've talked about, the console operating level can be slightly different between manufacturers, and we want to make this as easy as possible. Fortunately, nearly every meter out there on every live sound console has one thing in common: colors. When you're setting your gain, you're looking to get the average level of your signal into the yellow part of the meter. That's where the whole console is going to operate at its best. Now, if you want to get a little bit nerdier with it, most of the time this level will be around negative 18 dBFS or dB full scale. But you can check the manual on your mixer to make sure with how they've calibrated it. Now, let's bring it all back around full circle. We've set our input gain properly. We're operating with our input signal as close to line level as we can get it. Now, we've got to work on our fader levels. Remember, we want the faders to live in that high resolution area around unity, around 0, so that we can mix with maximum fader precision. In a perfect world, we want gain at line level and our faders at unity, so we can make very precise adjustments in our mix. But here's the challenge we have in live sound. What do we do, like we talked about, where if we set the gain on the channel properly, we pull up the fader to unity, and it's way too loud in the room? We already know we don't want to change our gain, because then our console won't be operating at the optimal level. And we also don't want to bring our fader down a bunch, because we'll lose that precise control we've worked so hard to achieve. So what are our options? Where do we turn it down for the room? Let's consider a few of these options. If we turn down our master fader, or we turn down the level of our PA amplifiers, we're going to penalize the loudness of everything in our mix. All the other channels might sound just fine once we set our preamp gain and fader level, so we don't want to turn down everything just because one thing is too loud, so that's not a good option. Like we talked about, we don't want to turn down our fader too much either. If it's just a few dB, that's fine. But what if we need to turn it down like 20 dB to make it sound right in the room? All of a sudden, we've lost all that fader resolution, and mixing becomes more difficult, and our faders are all over the place. Okay, so what about turning down the preamp? If we do that, not only are we not achieving a good operating level for the channel, we're also messing with all the other processing that's happening on that channel. If we turn down the gain, for example, all of our thresholds on compressors and gates get messed up, and it becomes extra difficult to dial in those settings to keep things consistent. Remember, line level is where the console is designed to operate and work. So we don't want to send a signal that's 15 or 20 dB below that just to make it sound right in the room. So that's a bad option too. This is where audio subgroups come in. Audio subgroups are going to be our final gain stage before our master fader. When you set up your console, what you want to do is to create subgroups for your instrument groups like drums, keys, guitars, tracks, vocals, and so on. And then you can use those subgroups to set the level for the room. This way, you can have your gain set properly, your faders operating at a high resolution, and everything comes out at the right level in the room in terms of volume. If you're not familiar with subgroups, they can also be called buses or just groups. They're basically just specialized channels that you can route multiple input channels through before they go out of your console through the master bus. So, for example, I'll route all of my drums to a drums subgroup or a drums bus, and I'll use that fader for the group to set the volume level for the drums in the room. Obviously, you can fine-tune levels of individual pieces of the drum kit with your individual channel faders to get your drum kit balanced the way you want, but the overall level of the whole drum kit will be controlled by the subgroup to set the volume for the room. This approach will let you maintain gain structure and optimal fader positions while still being able to have each instrument group at the right level in the room. This way, you've got the best of everything. You've got an optimized level coming into the console, you've got great levels for aux sends and monitor sends and effects, you've got enough fader resolution to be able to make precise adjustments, and you've got each group of instruments set at a level that sounds great in the room. Hey, if you want to learn a ton more about gain structure, EQ, compression, and mixing, we offer in-depth online courses on our website that you can get at the link in the video description. Also, if this video helped you and you want to see more content like this, make sure you like and subscribe so you can get all of our videos. This approach to gain structure will make a massive difference in your mix. Once you set up your console this way, mixing is going to get so much easier, and your mix will sound better in the room and on your live stream. But now I want to hear from you. Comment below if you're going to try structuring your console like this, or if there's something you've been struggling with when it comes to gain structure or mixing. Comment below and let's talk about it. Until next time, happy mixing.